here I am. Hey, I wanted to talk a little bit about post-traumatic growth. I was on another page on one of the social media and was talking about some spiritual stuff that I think is completely irrelevant to and or will make your trauma worse. And it brought up the idea of forgiveness. And someone made the comment that, oh, this is post-traumatic growth. This is way past something or other. And I was like, hmm. And that's partly where I think trauma delivery gets it wrong. Okay, cool. I didn't write anything in response. I thought I'd do that here, kind of like I did with my post-traumatic. I publish on my website or on my Facebook page and LinkedIn Live, and I use StreamYard for that for the most part. But I thought, what the heck, I'll try this here. And I won't say the same thing. Post-traumatic growth should be happening at the same time that you're healing your trauma. Okay, I don't think I could, I don't know how to use this technology to call up an image, so I'm not going to waste your time and empty airspace, which they say is a cardinal sin, to try to find that. But if you've got the right tools to heal trauma, one of the exciting things is that as trauma begins to be completed and discharged out of your body, and I'm not going to explain that. I might say that quite a few times here. But what ends up happening is, since nature abhors the nature that we exist in, it abhors a vacuum, then what you have is something filling that gap. And since you can heal your trauma without having to talk about it, having to remember it, or be diagnosed, what's going to fill that gap? Post-traumatic growth. So I use an illustration, and it's basically an X. And so it would look like that. And up at the top left, that's where we currently are before we start healing, or before we even, in my case, know what trauma even is. And as we begin to heal, that X is trauma symptoms. Now, on the bottom of the left is life signs, of which we seem to think we have zero. Not everything is as horribly black and white as we presume it to be. It feels like we are not only at zero, but we are way to the left on the negative number side. I've used that illustration many times, and that's probably true. We feel that way, and for the most part, it has that reality. Not every second of every day is necessarily hell if you've been traumatized. It wasn't my experience, and I know a lot of other people would say the same thing. The overall tone is hell. It's a mental hell. It's worse when you're alone. It's worse at night when you have to go to bed. And so we do things to evade that kind of stuff. And as we heal, and I'm referring to from my perspective as the completion and discharge, which is as it begins, a weekly thing in terms of a session with me, but your body begins to complete and discharge all of the accumulated garbage from the events of our life. And I say garbage because it isn't, how do I say that? Let me just say this. I'll just use the word, it accumulates. These events create stuff that stay in our body, our neurophysiology. It's not necessarily or even primarily psychological. And because that's true, that means the psychological stuff heals as and when you heal your body. So as this completion and discharge state is doing its work, we then create a vacuum, and life begins to fill it back in. And we don't know what that feels like. That's too foreign to us. For me, in my case, I lived for 58 years before I even knew how to define trauma, and I was an EMT. We didn't go to or we went to the very few, but okay, that would have been anxiety, panic attack, and we said, oh, it's trauma. But I had a complete crash, complete breakdown as a person in late 2011. And in that process, I was 56. And then when I was 58, somebody said, have you ever heard of Dr. Baselli? And that started the whole healing process. All told, about 7 years. And in that time, as I healed and I worked with a provider, I never once talked about my stuff. But in that time that I healed, and I had all of these events through all of my life and the shame and all this kind of stuff, and it creates our personality to a certain extent. It creates our behaviors to a great extent. And all of that, then that's the weight that we feel, right? Before we start healing, we just think we're complete schmucks, assholes, unlovable, and broken, whatever. None of it positive. That's the way we feel and believe about ourselves, because that's the lie of shame. Okay, cool. We don't know that before somebody explains it to us. And in any event, once that begins to lose its grip, the water of life, as it were, I'm thinking of a well, and it's kind of like a tree across the street there. It looks like I'm buried in snow, doesn't it? But it's not. It's a beautiful day outside. And I almost turned my mic to get, but the camera is on the computer here. It's beautiful outside. It is chilly, but it'll warm up. But the tree across the street, you know how it gets water way to the top of the 90-foot height? Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's a very cool process. That's kind of like what we are when we start to heal. So as we begin to get this water up, it begins to bring life to the tree. And that's what we focus on when we're working together. That's just the way I decided to create the program that I created based on my own experience. Why do I need to discuss all the crap that we've been through? For most people, they already know that. And they know it makes them feel like crap. So why go back there and risk re-traumatizing? Why not focus on something entirely different? And if stuff bubbles up to the top, we know how to work with that. That's okay. That's what I teach people. And that makes the healing process a whole lot more, well, I don't want to say fun, a whole lot more hopeful, as it were, tolerable. There's another word I'm looking for here. I'll skip it for now. As that's going on, though, so for example, I'll tell you a little story here. When I started to heal using this process, of course, I just wanted to tell everybody about this. And I know that sounds like evangelizing, so I don't do it. Anyway, I ran into a couple at the market, farmer's market, in fact. And we were talking. And so he asked me what I've been doing. So I told him, blah, blah, blah. And he says, well, I can kind of get a sense that it's working for you. I thought that was an interesting statement. So I said, what do you mean? He said, well, you're smiling. I said, oh, well, thank you, I guess. And as we walked away, I said to my partner, I don't smile. And she looked at me and said, oh, you're making some changes. I was just like, oh my God. Now I can see, I like to think I was a smart guy. Yeah, not so much. And then I used to think I was, um, I don't know what the hell I used to think about myself. I knew I carried pain, and I always felt like I was an imposter. And at that moment, talking to him, I didn't feel any of that. I felt lighter. I felt like I'd found my answer, and there's a lot of stuff to substantiate that. But here, even in my healing process, I was beginning to grow. I was beginning to change. There is no boom, you're healed, and then boom, you start growing. No. If I go out across the street and lop, well, heck, I darn near got clipped by one of the branches that broke off of that tree. Okay, so what does the tree do? It keeps on living while it's dealing with that wound of that broken branch. And the other day, somebody finally drove by. I don't know how they even knew it was there. That's pretty curious to me. But they bucked it up using a saw, and I'm guessing it was a hand saw. So I was like, I'm impressed. In any event, those two things happen simultaneously. And in this post I was reading this morning, it talked about forgiveness and so forth and so on. And I said, well, that's too religious. Outside of religion, that practice has no merit, no science to support it, nothing. It's no different, really, than just giving up resentment. And in its worst case, it's abused. Let me tell you a story about that. I outlined my story of my religious experience on another video, so I'm not going to do that here. I'm going to tell you how that church in particular ended after I left it. We had an immigrant in town, young guy, and he was just one of those you knew didn't have all the lights on in the marquee. That's okay. He seemed nice enough. I don't know that he was a troublemaker. I never heard anything about that. But after I left the church decided a good thing to do would be to hire him to watch the children. That was how they would reach out to him, give him something to do, give him a little bit of money. And so he was put in charge of the children during Sunday school. It went exactly where you think it went. Anyway, the reason I learned about it is because one of the brick guys, a masonry worker, and I were on the same job site together, and he asked me one day, he said, didn't you used to go to what was the name of that church? New Testament, I think it was called. Whatever it was called. I'll call it New Testament. I said, yeah, I did. So gave him a little story of why we left. And so he said, you want to hear what happened to the church? And I said, oh, yeah, sure. What do you mean by that? They hired this guy. The guy was apparently sexually abusing the children. And so somehow he got arrested. Somebody, one of the families, that's right, this was multiple, called the police. So this guy was arrested. Now they're talking about deportation, all the rest of that. And the church came to the families and said, we want you to forgive this guy so he can stay in country. And they were like, are you out of your mind? What? But that's the concept of forgiveness that absolutely means you don't have your boundaries. It's completely against everything you would learn in mental health counseling about what it means to take care of yourself and your own. You let the abuser off the hook completely. That is not what forgiveness means. I forgive you. Sure, you can say that just before you pull the trigger. Done. You forgave him. Or in the case of that show called The Seals, and I'm forgetting the name, so I'm just going to summarize it this way. The guy said, "Sure, I forgive you, but I cannot trust you ever again." And he ripped his badge patch off, which meant he was now no longer a part of that SEAL team or the entire organization. That's the same thing. Yeah, I can, and I'm not even going to say that. At a certain point, you begin to realize that carrying that weight of even giving them headspace, what a waste of time. And when you're healing, if you're using good tools, that just becomes a natural thing to do. You get excited about post-traumatic growth. It's pretty amazing stuff. But this is where a lot of thinking, and this is where a lot of trauma therapy is around and so forth and so on. It is like stuck in the Stone Ages. No, it doesn't have to be that way at all. There's nothing anywhere authoritative that says that forgiveness has to be accomplished or anything like that. That drives from in here, and it sounds a lot like the AA movement, where they said you need to go make restitution as much as possible. No, don't ever do that. If that doesn't fall squarely standing right in your face, no. Because now the risk of re-traumatizing grows exponentially, and you're doing more harm than good, blah, blah, blah. That's where that falls. So to me, it was like, okay, you're thinking about you is not worth my time. And it's interesting how these things keep popping back into your life to clarify things that, and I've got some stories about how this all came to pass and how they abused me and my family, and then how they even come to close because the 5 families decided to sue. Well, okay, that the insurance company said bye, which meant that the church, they might have reached a settlement with those families, but the church then didn't have any insurance, which means that and what that does in a small town. Oh my goodness. So if nobody's going to church, you're not picking anybody's pocket and the pastor doesn't get paid. Yeah. Where do you think that goes? So they closed their doors. Pastor's still being a pastor. He's up in Minneapolis. As far as I know, I don't know what happened to anybody else in that church. I often wonder, but then again, I often don't. More often than not. Post-traumatic growth and reaching states of post-traumatic growth don't require any forgiveness at all. They don't. You could never attend to that idea, and it will not diminish your living at all. And your living can begin the day you start healing. It won't feel that way. Remember that X I talked about, like this, when you start, you're still all familiar with your own symptoms. We all are. And that doesn't change overnight. And this whole 21-day habit forming thing, it wasn't 21 days was the fastest in that group. 109 was the slowest. The median's about 66. So in this process of healing, you need to go through enough time for the body to be completing and discharging before you might even begin to feel some of the liberation that's already occurring. That's a cool. It's already going on, and the first thing you might feel is relaxation. And for some people, oh man, that is still the ability to relax And when I say relax, I don't mean put my feet up, open up a tablet, and start writing to my boss or keeping track of the market or anything like that. When I say put, I mean on the sandy beach or in your own living room, feet up. Me, I prefer a cup of coffee because I don't drink, which is another benefit of healing. And doing whatever you want to do, or, and I love this saying, I think I might have made it a meme. Sometimes the most important thing to do is nothing important. Yeah. Nothing important at all. Yeah, that's it. You pick up your tablet and you start reading. I've got more books here than I can shake a stick at. Well, and they keep on coming. I just bought I just got another version of Ken Kesey's electric Kool-Aid acid test. I'm going to revisit some history. In any event, yeah, relaxation. For some people, it's sleeping. For some people, it's they suddenly go, wow, I remember when I used to do this, I felt this and this. Where'd that go? Yeah. Some of this stuff that you experience right now that's just will just dissolve on its own. That's what happened to me in my shame. Something I lived with solidly. I heard from it every day for 58 years. I think it was about 60 when I noticed it changed. And it was all right. I was trying to get to know people in the community we had moved into, and there's two guys in the common house. I went in there to talk to them, just kind of because that's where my feet went. Well, meanwhile, my shame is screaming at me, oh my God, you're just going to embarrass yourself. You're going to do this, you're going to do that. What if they hate you? What if they don't want to talk to you? Blah, blah, blah. And so I walked in and, hey guys, how's it going? So they just said, no, we're just shooting the shit. You know, that's what guys do sometimes, is really just talking about tools or talking about woodwork or, you know, sometimes stuff around, since it was an intentional community, there's work to be done, that kind of thing. So I stood there and shot the shit with them for a little while. And then, okay, I said to myself, I got things to do. Just said, all right, guys, I'm going to head out of here. I'll see you later. And I walked out. And it was sunny. It was bright. Well, kind of like today without the effect of the snow back there, which doesn't exist. Anyway, and I don't know if, no. In any event, I walk around the corner of the common house. What happened to my shame? I wasn't feeling it. I wasn't hearing it. It was just like, this is like being out in the wild where there's no people, no anything at all. And I was like, I expected more of a fight. I expect to get down and dirty on this one and get some good science out of it, but nope, gone. And I was like, well, hallelujah. I don't miss it one bit. I lived with that stuff for that long, and it just all on its own, it went away. I don't know if it was its last hurrah right there, but that was it. That was it. The flip side of that is it does not make you instantly Mr. Confident, Mr. Strong, Mr. Anything. That requires some work because there's still these trains of thoughts that we've had inside our head that are, and the interesting thing about neural networks is the one network is not completely right here. Yeah, it's sprinkled throughout because what's really cool about the brain is that you have your left half, no, right half, then you have your left half, and the corpus callosum that I think it's about here connects the two. And when we get injured or when we have things like trauma, suddenly it's a little bit like this, or little bit. So there is a good part of these networks that are failing, and these are all lit up and active, and we have an issue. And then as we heal, this stuff begins to wake up. Then we find out that these neural networks are not centered. And so, well, however, the Broca's area is right about here. And that is the primary center where we deal with speech. But it is not exclusively right here. I mean, I've taken a lot of, well, I took an elbow there once. And yeah, it hurt. I saw stars. I went down. And I think the first word, yeah, there was a word because it didn't knock it entirely off the line, was fuck to myself. I don't think I said it out loud. You know, I had to figure out how to defend myself. So I had things I had to do. But, you know, so immediately started protecting myself until my senses came back to me and I could figure out what was going on. However, this still has connections over here and all of these neural networks. And as you heal, so, you know, hey, we've got this mishmash of networks from when we were traumatized, right? So as we begin to heal and the body uses its power to heal itself, it begins to dismantle some of this stuff. And the body, as you can tell, cranium is a certain size, right? So one of the things it has is limited space. Therefore, it doesn't leave stuff laying around. So if this old scaffolding we've got from our past life is suddenly beginning to not be used, the brain will begin to scavenge it to create new neural networks that will be this harmony and these beautiful lights, and think of it any way you want. But that's what's going on. And that will start immediately, but it doesn't come out here feeling wise. It doesn't come out here feeling wise, or even here feeling wise. It might take a few months for you to even feel safe enough to think that this change is going to be a real change. But oh, it is real. Because when you can put your feet up and relax and do nothing important and feel good, yeah, that is a good sign of being healed. And I'm going to steal this from Dan McClellan. I don't know what he means by the word fit. This video brought to you by Till Valhalla Project. Keep moving forward t-shirt. Good little project. I own a lot of their t-shirts, but it's for vets. And so keep moving forward. The back says, don't want to do that. How about this? With that, I bid you have a good day. If you're having issues with trauma, you want to talk about it, my name is Leckey Harrison. You can reach me at Leckey at raiseyourresilience.com. Obviously, the website. Please feel free to go there, look at the videos. There's a lot of them. Read the blogs. There's a few of those. Read the information. Then if you want to get hold of me again, you've got my address. That was weird. I don't know why that happened, but it did. The screen came down and it's like it was going to shut off. And I was like, Have yourselves a great weekend. Bye.